Hey, what's up guys, Metal571 here. Today I'm going to be talking about the HIFIMAN Edition XX. I almost said HE because I'm so used to saying that. This is a Massdrop exclusive $599 20 ohm 93 dB per milliwatt planar magnetic headphone. It's also using an older headband, as you can see. It's basically the HE4XX headband, and the drivers are not the same as an Edition X or an Edition X V2, but they are somewhat related in sound, as we'll see. So getting straight into the sound, because this is a sound review, the bass on this headphone. So the bass extension is excellent, as we would expect, and this beats the 4XX clearly here. As if you remember, I had some issues with the bass rolling off on the 4XX, so this fixes that, which it should, especially at this price. It's about as bottomless as it gets. All my electronic music that I use to test the really low bass notes is coming through 110% here. There's still no mid-bass emphasis or anything as usual with the planar, so it's very flat sounding, very flat in terms of the frequency response as measured by a head and torso simulator. So if you prefer more bass than a flat bass response, you'll want to add a Harman style shelf, which I tend to do. This didn't need much. For me, maybe a dB or two. Some of you will find that really excessive anyway, so that's just preference, but I didn't have any issues with speed or detail or anything. It's where it should be for the price. Now, the mid-range is where this thing starts to diverge from my preferences. Actually, the upper mids are not really that laid back here. It's not like an HE500. They're somewhat aggressive. They're not super forward, maybe like 2 or 3 dB, which for me is a lot because I'm very sensitive to such things, as you guys know. So I've reduced it by a couple of dB there. And they're also slightly hazier than the main competition I'm comparing to here. This is more expensive, the LCD2 Classic, but because it's one of the only other planar options that's in the high mid-fi, somewhere between 300 and 1,000 US dollars, that's what I'm going to be comparing it to mainly. It's also the main thing I have here to compare with. The Elex that I reviewed previously is no longer here. It's back to its owner. So the mids, though, so they're slightly hazier than the 2 Classic, as I was saying. They're also more aggressive in the upper mids. It doesn't have that 1K forwardness that the Odysseys have, though. So if you're really annoyed by that and you don't want to use EQ, these definitely don't have that kind of a sound. They still sound more warmth, and there's more warmth and more forwardness here in the middle of the mids and the low mids than the Classic reference I use. This is the HD6XX from Massdrop, which is basically my reference headphone for tone, except that the upper mids are a little too forward on this headphone for me. But other than that, it's usually what I use as a reference, and the mids on that are a lot more laid back around 1K. That's just kind of how Sennheiser has it tuned, and planars usually have some more extra warmth in the low mids, which is for me maybe around 500 hertz up through 1K. So, but they're not actually like forward where the LCD2 Classic kind of has an excessive amount of energy around 1K. This does not. But yes, again, the upper mids are a little forward, a little bit hazy. It's a little disappointing. I wish it was a little bit cleaner across the board, really, which is what we're going to see again when we get to the treble right now, which is that the treble detail here, the upshot is it's actually worse than the LCD2 Classic. It was kind of quite disappointing. The tonality of this headphone's not awful, and it's not super far off the mark, but the biggest thing with this headphone is grain is a problem. And I feel like that's probably not the case with the Edition X and the Edition X V2, but I haven't heard those, so I'll reserve judgment for them. But what interestingly, another tidbit about this headphone is that, which makes more sense now, is that the HIFIMAN rep at CanJam, New York, when I went to last month, said that this is not the Edition X or Edition X V2 diaphragm at all. It's a custom design for Massdrop to hit the price target, and it shows. And the detail is just not there. It's really kind of disappointing for $599. But other than that, the frequency response, which is completely separate from grain, by the way, for those of you who don't normally follow my channel, that's the way I talk about resolution. It has nothing to do with frequency response in my experience. But there's a 5 dB peak, something like that. It's 7 kilohertz. The whole treble above that sounds up tilted by about 3 dB to me. So it's kind of brighter, and you know, it's not that far off what I remember hearing from something like the HE1000, which is probably not that surprising given that this is kind of the same housing, not the headband, but this stuff's the same kind of housing. But it's just so much more grittiness and graininess and roughness sound in this treble in the headphone here that I'm sorry, it's really disappointing to me for that. That's one of the main things you should be getting when you're paying at least this much. Is more detail than this thing seems to be putting out. Now, even after EQ, there's a little bit of a sibilant edge to the headphone, so I still wouldn't recommend this headphone if you're treble sensitive, even if you want to equalize it to fix that. It's a good example of fake detail, actually, is another thing I wrote in my notes, which is it's brighter than, you know, like a Sennheiser, but it's also not that resolving at the same time. So it's trying to like make up for it or something by sounding brighter, and it doesn't. So the Soundstage, here's where I'm glad to say this is actually quite a good Soundstage headphone. I thought it was slightly wider, in fact, than the LCD2 Classic, which, by the way, definitely gets a reputation. These Odysseys, I think from their early revisions, get a reputation for having a small soundstage, but it's really not. It's actually quite good. It's quite a bit better than the Sennheisers, of course, which are pretty closed in. I don't know what that hand motion was. But the Edition XX here, it's got a wider stage, a little bit wider. The instruments do sound a little bit forced to the sides, though. But one of the weird things that when I was first A/Bing this against the Odyssey was that something sounded significantly different about the stage that I couldn't put my finger on, and I finally figured out what it was after a while. And it sounds like the soundstage in this headphone is coming from above more. It's really strange. It's like the instruments on the Odyssey, when you put it on right after this headphone, sound like they're, you know, right in front of you or off to the side. But this one, it sounds like some things are like above you, pointing down from like not the ceiling, but like upwards. And it's really diffuse and bizarre. It kind of reminds me of K702, but not in the vertical aspect. So yeah, it's possible for a soundstage to have a strange direction, not necessarily from the sides, but from like above or below. And it sounded like that was happening to me with this headphone. So it's definitely got a grand wide stage. I don't think the imaging is quite as precise as the LCD2 Classic. Not like the LCD2C is perfect either, but it definitely seemed like it forced instruments apart a bit more. But it's still got a really good stage, and I think this is a good soundstage for the price. As the upshot here. So other stuff about the headphone that you might want to note: the headband here, as I said at the beginning, it's the original headband from the 4XX or like the HE500. It's the old style headband. Some people absolutely hate this headband. I didn't have any issues with it, but it really doesn't have that much padding going on. And so if you're sensitive to this kind of a headband, you probably won't like this headphone very much for comfort. I didn't have any issues with the pads or anything. They're hybrids. So they're velour on the inside and pleather on the outside, or leather. I don't actually know if that's real or not. And so that's the only thing to keep in mind. Otherwise, the cups are massive, as you can see. I mean, like compared to the size of my face, it's just absolutely ridiculous. Make the 380s look tiny. So that's not an issue. The other problem is the cable is so bad. What is this thing? Like, it holds its shape so forcefully. Like, I can't. It was hard to like get it to stay in place plugging into my 789 on my desk. Like, it just snaps back at you all the time. This is something I always do, is use Velcro cable ties. But man, this is probably the most annoying cable. This might be worse than the Elex cable that I've used in a while. What is going on here? HIFIMAN really needs to step it up with that. I'm sorry. It also doesn't come with a balance cable in the box, but you don't really need one because it's pretty easy to drive this headphone. I believe it does have a 1/4-inch adapter. I just don't have it on my desk at the moment. And yeah, right angle plug's kind of weird too, but anywho, it's designed to work off of a mobile device, which it does do. So, in the conclusion here, what am I saying about this headphone? So, I think a lot of people are going to say, okay, should I upgrade from the 4XX if I like that kind of sound? Maybe. So there's some distinct advantages here over the 4XX. So for example, it's got much better bass extension. 4XX clearly rolls off a bit more than it should for a planar, or what I would normally expect from a planar. This does not. Bass is cleaner here. It sounds like it hits with a decent amount of authority. Some people absolutely hate the way planars deliver dynamics. I don't, so that's just a personal thing. But yeah, the extension's all there. It's all there. It'll go way down and hit whatever notes you're looking for and stuff that you can't even hear. And then some. So that's significantly improved. And also the Soundstage is also significantly improved over the 4XX, which really didn't sound a lot better than the Sennheiser's 6XX here. In my case, which has always been a closed-in kind of a sound. It has some soundstage, the imaging's not very good, and it's kind of 3 blob-ish, meaning the image is in front of you or to the side, not much in between, and it's kind of small. This is a very large stage, more like an LCD2C, but even bigger. It's a little bit grand. Imaging's not amazing, but it's pretty good, and I think that's a significant upgrade over the 4XX if you love soundstage. But the thing that the major knock against this is the grain annoys me so much, and it's so disappointing. I wish the grain was more in line with what this price bracket should be. And when I, compared this to the LCD2 Classic, the 6XX, it didn't even sound like the grain was significantly better than the 6XX here. It actually sounded like it was more. It's possible the 4XX actually sounded like it had more detail than this does. I don't have a 4XX on hand. That's just going by memory. But yeah, it's not the most resolving headphone, to say the least. So it's kind of a mixed bag for me to recommend this thing. I think that if you like a brighter headphone with a really good bass extension, and you don't want to wait for the LCD2 Classic to go on sale, or you absolutely have to use it from a mobile device, and you're prioritizing soundstage here and ease of driving over detail, like way over detail, then this could be what you're looking for. But that seems like a strange combination to me. So, I mean, unless you're in that, group of people who want that combination of features, then I'm sorry. I'm not a big fan of this headphone, personally. So, that is the HIFIMAN Edition XX. Hopefully it helps you make an informed purchase decision, and I'll see you guys in the next review as always. Take care.